Hey, let's dive into the civil service. Now, I'm going to focus this lecture on what's in the textbook, but there has been a lot of changes to the civil service with the second Trump administration and recent Supreme Court rulings. So, all of this is particularly applicable and that we're going to discuss today. Um, Historically, in particular context, certainly at the state and local levels, but changes at the federal level to civil service have been kind of drastic, but just following the kind of scheme of reform movements that we talked about in Module 8. And so that's just another type of reform. But some of the stuff here and the challenges discussed have changed a good bit since this book was published. So I just want to make that clear and to keep that in context and in mind. But let's go with what we have here and get right into it. So the civil service. Who works for government? I do. Local public works crews, school teachers, health nurses, parks staff. How do they get their jobs? That's what we're going to talk about. There are about 2 million federal employees, civilian employees, about 5 million state, 14 million local government employees. Most government employees are civil servants, not political appointees, and you will likely be a civil servant in some sort of governmental capacity. The civil service matters because that's the stakes for public service. It affects the quality of personnel, affects service reliability, public trust, constitutional rights protection, professional competency and integrity, consistency in rule application, and public treatment. Civil service quality directly affects every service outcome. So there's some evolution, and again, there's ongoing evolution in civil service traditions. The kind of historical one is the Washingtonian versus the Jacksonian view. Washington, at the beginning of the federal government, under the Constitution of 1789, was fitness and ability for government positions, and there was a balance of geographic and political representation, and professional competence was the primary criterion. Under Jackson, this began the really era of the spoils. So the victor belonged the spoils was the theme here. So government jobs are rewards for political support, and there's a democratic rotation. Ordinary citizens can serve, right? So the tension here was competence in the Washingtonian sense, or democratic representation in the Jacksonian sense. The spoils system in action, once the kind of Jacksonian version of this to the victor go the spoils became, the rule of the day, patronage becomes a problem. So the winning political party replaced all the government employees, and the jobs were just the jobs in the federal government were based on political loyalty. Competence and experience were secondary considerations. In the public sector example, tax collectors and customs officials, those appointments were based on political connections. Post office, treasury positions filled by party loyalists. Public services became a tool of political machines. And so this involved incompetent and corrupt employees. The government services themselves suffered, and the public service declined. Reform was triggered by President Garfield's assassination. There's a fabulous Netflix miniseries on this. You should check it out. But President Garfield was assassinated in 1881 by Charles Guiteau. And Charles wanted an office. He thought that he deserved a government job for his political support, and he kind of really, really wanted it. And when he didn't get it, he killed the president. Well, he shot him, and then the president later died. But there was a public reaction to this, right? There was an outrage over the consequences of the spoil system. And so there was a demand for merit-based government employment, recognizing that the patronage kind of spoil system was threatening democracy itself. And so this led to the Pendleton Act of 1883. And so the key provisions here go from spoils to merit. Merit-based hiring, so competitive exams, political neutrality, no political activities or assessments, can't be fired for political reasons. This initially just covered 10% of federal jobs, and then gradually expanded to just about all of them. Professional career paths, began to emerge. There was standardized training and licensing, reduced corruption, and this is kind of the foundations of the modern professional public service. So modern civil service principles. Again, we stick with kind of merit-based hiring. The best qualified candidates get the job. Position-based pay, your compensation is based on your job requirements. Political neutrality, there's protection from political interference. And public service accountability, right? Serving the public interest. You see how this works in practice from a number of different areas. You can see public health, schools, fire and emergency services. So let's go with fire. So hiring is done on written exams, physical tests, academy training. Promotion is based on competitive testing, performance evaluations, protection for their job. You have due process for any disciplinary actions, and there's limited political activity and professional independence. We call those who work in, organizations human capital. And people are the government's most important resource. Human capital includes knowledge, skills, motivations, and networks. And so the government wants to invest in this human capital through the recruitment and selection process, by training and developing, performance management and feedback, and career advancement and retention. Let's think of 4 types of resources that we have that are kind of a management challenge within the civil service. Human resources, right? Skilled, motivated employees. Financial resources, adequate funding. Information resources, data, technology, knowledge, and time resources. You can think of a school district example here for budget decisions. Hire more teacher versus by curriculum. Professional development versus assessment systems. Same-day response to families versus thorough individual planning. So kind of more reform occurred during the New Deal period. This was kind of a enormous growth of the federal government as it responded to the New Deal, or to the Great Depression, through a number of different federal programs that were kind of all under the umbrella of the New Deal. And this led to kind of a need for professional administrative capacity, extension of the merit system to new agencies, and development of specialized expertise. And so you have a number of different ways that the public service grows here. There are classification and compensation systems. This is how jobs are organized and paid. Position classification. Jobs are grouped together based on similar duties, by grade level, standardized job descriptions, and the pay philosophy, or the compensation philosophy. Pay is comparable to the private sector in theory. Regular salary surveys and adjustments, benefit packages, attract and retain talent, and performance incentives and bonuses. Modern challenges, recruitment and retention. Competing with the private sector is one of the government's kind of constant refrains. And, we can't often provide as much salary, but the benefits in the government sector and the longevity in the job are one of those things that do draw people to it. Generational differences in work expectations, skills gaps, performance management. In the public sector, it could be difficult to fire poor performers, and there's limited rewards for high performers. We often think about other areas in the civil service, like representative bureaucracy. So you have diversity and representation in public service, where the government workforce is reflecting the community values, whether it's the racial and ethnic diversity, gender representation, geographic distribution, socioeconomic backgrounds, and all of this leads to legitimacy and the public trust. And a symbol of equal opportunity. And you understand the community needs better. In representative bureaucracy and public services, there's challenges. There's examples here of fire and schools and public health, the fire one. Progress, more diverse recruit classes since the 1970s. The challenges, still underrepresented women and minorities in many departments. And the strategies are targeted recruitment, revised physical tests, and community partnerships. Schools, even here at the university, teaching force has grown more diverse, but it still lags the student demographics. And so the challenges are the pipeline, the pay, conditions, and there's a number of different opportunities there in all of these areas. So those in civil service, the public employees, have certain rights under the Constitution. First Amendment rights, free speech, political activity restrictions, though, and whistleblower protections. They have due process rights. There is a vested property interest in your continued employment. And so any fair procedures for discipline or termination must follow due process. And there's an appeals process. There's also equal protection, so non-discrimination in hiring and promotion, reasonable accommodations for disabilities, and sexual harassment protections. In practice, there's a couple public service examples here around free speech and due process. You can take some time to think through these. Ongoing reform movements, performance-based movements, reforms, pay for performance, flexible work arrangements, accountability reforms, easier termination of poor performers, ethics oversights, transparency in personnel decisions, and modernization efforts, digital applications, competency-based hiring, continuous recruitment process, and data-driven decisions. Current debates in civil service. Apart from the one that I began this lecture with, there are teacher tenure reforms, performance versus protection, and political versus professional tensions here. Technology in civil service. Technology, again, is transforming just about all of society here. So recruitment and hiring impacts, performance management impacts, and employee services impacts of technology. The future of civil service, gig economy impact. So the contract versus permanent employment, flexible work arrangements, skills-based hiring. Millennials, Gen Z, and eventually Gen Alpha have different expectations, especially from the Gen X and the older baby boomer generation that is still in service. And there's skills evolution, so data analytics and technology skills, emotional intelligence, collaboration and network management, continuous learning. All of these emerging trends and challenges are going to be what you face. What you should expect, though, still is job security, comprehensive benefits, opportunities for advancement, and meaningful public service work. Bureaucratic challenges will exist still. Politics is ever present. There's some competition with salary between the private sector. Again, benefits sometimes help with that. And so there's a case study here on, police hiring reform. You can take a minute to pause and view this. You can take a minute to pause and view some questions to consider. All right, so we've talked about civil service evolved from the patronage to merit-based systems. Modern systems balance competence, fairness, and democratic accountability. Representative bureaucracy is important for legitimacy and effectiveness. Employees must be balanced, rights must be balanced with their public service responsibilities. Current reforms focus on performance, flexibility, and modernization. Technology is changing everything. Future success requires on adaptability to a changing workforce and to society's expectations. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for making it through the civil service. We'll see you for the next time.